Hi, I'm Jeremy.
Hi, I'm Nick.
We are Cloud of Witnesses.
Thinking like the saints.
We hope that you enjoy our conversation with Adam Patrick of the podcast, The Age of Information. Yes, we are very excited and have the honor to bring on today Adam Patrick from the Age of Information podcast, a podcast that is really on the cusp of the conversation between orthodoxy and you might call it the culture war. Adam, I know you've discussed that very use of that very term or that phrase on your podcast. Adam, it's a real pleasure. Thank you for joining us on Cloud of Witnesses.
Well, the pleasure and the honor is mine, fellas. We turned this whole thing around in a week from meeting each other to doing the episode, which is almost unheard of. And
Yeah.
I've had a little bit of time. It's Thanksgiving week, but I've had some time to check out what you're doing. And I was letting you know before the show how cool and unique I think it is. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be on, and yeah, happy to get into whatever you like.
Here we are, right? Three men who all podcast, right? And you've asked, interestingly, on your very podcast episodes, this question that I think all of us Orthodox Christians, or maybe all Christians, kind of struggle with, and that is, we're not clergy. We want to avoid the focus being on us, right? The focus obviously is to be on Christ always. How did you come to terms yourself with that, to say, you know what, here's how I'm approaching this, and kind of on your own terms to make it right for you to do a podcasting?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when the show started out, it was called "You're Talking Over Me" with Adam Patrick, and that was right when the COVID started, right back in early 2020, so almost 4 years ago. And that was very like libertarian focused, a libertarian take on what was going on socioeconomically, politically, the stabs and the things, right?
Yep.
And so we were entirely guest focused. Every episode, it was every week, every Friday, one guest. So I was used to doing the guest thing. And so when I took a year off, about the whole year of 2022 off, I did one episode in the middle of 2022. And that was to really focus on attending church services, liturgy, reading catechism books, like, and maybe we'll get into this. My background is theology heavy. I'm very informed over the course of time on Roman Catholicism and Protestantism, because I disliked them so much growing up in Roman Catholicism that I'm trying to be honest with your listeners, that
no, that's good.
Formulated some pretty hardcore arguments against those two things. So when Orthodoxy fell on my lap, it was like, well, I'm going to formulate a whole bunch of arguments against this too, right? Because this is not going to give me the answers that I was looking for there. Turns out it does. So I just went right to, well, I have to do a show. I have to do a show about this because I've just spent the last year delving into all these things. I'm going to go with what works. I'm going to go with guests. And the guests I'm going to bring on are going to be theologians, scholars, clergy, and that's how we're going to establish a baseline for what we're going to talk about, so people don't think I'm just some random dude.
Yeah.
And I'm really good at, I guess the short way of saying it is kind of being, I hope, entertaining enough to get through the fact that I don't entirely know something. So and another thing we tried to do early was if I read a book, I want to get the author of the book on the show.
Nice.
That's oftentimes very difficult because a lot, especially the geopolitical stuff up here, those people aren't even alive anymore, or they're like fleeing from the CIA or something. So it's just tough to get them on. But the answer to your question is we established the baseline early, and then we were able to work off of that and have more discussions between friends of mine and myself that focused on those conversations, those books, and those works, so that we didn't feel like we were overstepping what we'd already kind of established that we could do. And one of the very helpful things with this is I'm trained in philosophy. I grew up with a philosophy professor as a father, psychologist and therapist as a mother, and being right on the cusp of Gen X and Gen Y, that 1982, I was born, so like right there, 1 foot in analog and 1 foot in the digital. There's enough you can talk about around theology that works for the theology. So I do presuppositional apologetics, which I've always done when I was a Roman Catholic, when I was an atheist, and now as a an Orthodox Christian, that works really well in the Orthodox sphere. I mean, philosophy itself is so wound up in that. And I never feel like I have to ask permission to talk about those things. And what's really cool about that is all of the clergy and theologians and scholars that we have on to talk about this all know that stuff too.
Yeah.
So it's very validating and like just super cool for me to be like, well, I'm this lay guy nobody knows about who's over here BSing about philosophy. Oh, this, clergy member who's published 7 books and has 2 doctorates is totally vibing with what I'm talking about. Like that's such a cool thing to be able to do. And I just set up real quick a good, like I said, baseline of what we were able to get away with and not get away with. And we're very quick to throw out disclaimers. I'm not an expert on this. This is my opinion on this thing, et cetera, et cetera. And so far we've people like it. So
nice.
Keep doing the work until it doesn't.
That's great. Well, I have a question, Adam. So, the title of your podcast is The Age of Information. So I was assuming before you said it that you were coming from maybe like an atheist background because of this kind of cultural criticism that is maybe implied in your in the title of your podcast. And I was wondering, I've seen some of your episodes as well, and it seems like, how would you describe, like, how did you come to this title and like what inspires most of your topics, etc.?
Yeah. One of the ways I put this is even when I was a little kid, like grammar school, right? And the teacher would ask a question. If I didn't know the answer, I wouldn't put my hand up. And if I put my hand up, you had to call on me. So I've always had to have the answer to whatever we're talking about. I'm one of those idiots that it's Googling things all the time if I don't know. Like I can't watch a movie at home without, did this really happen? That doesn't seem like that. Right? Like I have to watch the movie a second time after I've researched everything the first time. So, and you're right to say that for about 20 years, I was an atheist. I grew up in the Roman Catholic Church. I did all the altar server catechesis thing, had all the sacraments, like a good Roman Catholic, Novus Ordo Roman Catholic. Just kind of went through the motions with all that. When I got old enough to question it, it was from a pretty learned base for a teenager. I mean, I had a kind of, like I said, my father taught philosophy, so I'd already read Aristotle and Plato and Proclus and Plotinus and all these, and whatever we had of the church fathers back then was probably Augustine.
Yeah.
Aquinas. I don't remember there much more than that.
Irenaeus, maybe. Yeah.
Enough to be able to ask questions to the priest or the nuns or the brothers. We had Franciscan brothers that ran the school that I went to. And it just seemed like there wasn't adequate answers for anything. I was getting the runaround and I got kind of tired of it and I left. So I'd never spent any time in the Protestant world, but I had friends that were pretty hardcore Calvinists growing up, although you wouldn't know that from the way they live their normal everyday lives. But on Sundays, they were hardcore Calvinists. So when you talk to them about Christianity, they were hardcore Calvin. I'm like, this is horrendous. I don't want anything to do with any of this. So I essentially was, for all intents and purposes, an atheist for about 20 years until about 2020, right? During that time, I also realized that the general atheist critique of Christianity was pretty bad, right? That you could also find that there isn't any there's less justification for atheism than there is for bad Christianity. That put me in a very unique situation because I knew that atheism wasn't tenable. And the best I could do for a worldview was libertarianism. I couldn't really find anything better because I hadn't found orthodoxy yet. But at the same time, there was aspects of Christianity that leaked into libertarianism that didn't jive fully with the libertarian, right? So nothing ever really lined up for me. But the point of the title, The Age of Information, is to say that there is no excuse not to find the answers to all of these things at some point. And the examples I use is, Martin Luther in the early 16th century didn't have Google. He had the Hebrew Bible of the Jewish people who were living in Germany at that time, which was very different than Second Temple Jews. And he didn't know that because he didn't know that. And it wasn't until decades later that there was a Tübingen communication with Constantinople that he was aware of the Greeks because he talked about them at his trial, but he may or may not have understood the definitive point of the theology like Melanchthon and later people did. But the point being, it's 2023. You don't have that excuse anymore. So for people to come on a show or message on Facebook or put up comments that are clearly incorrect, I mean, just factually incorrect or historically incorrect or philosophically unjustified. The internet has given everybody an opinion, the ability to have an opinion. And they think because they have an opinion, it should be just as valid as everyone else's opinion. Yet these are the same people who, not that I care about presidential elections, but they're very quick to point out if so-and-so doesn't like the results of X, Y, or Z, that is alternative facts, and they're doing the same thing. So yes, the point of the age of information is to say, we're not going to let you get away with that, right? You can't just say something and not have it challenged because what you're saying is factually incorrect, and say, well, it doesn't matter. Like if I challenge it and you say, well, that's your opinion. No, it's not my opinion. It's historically, here's the book that shows historically what happened and where it happened and why it happened. So what you're saying is wrong, right? And there's no excuse to be wrong in 2023. So it's taking all of that and distilling it down into a narrow focus of kind of how we approach the program.
You know, what's really interesting is that it seems like that happened with a lot of people during COVID. Is that, you know, people were trapped. People had a lot of time to introspect and think about things. And at least what we're noticing in San Diego and kind of the West Coast in general, I don't know about the rest of the country, but that there's just a huge influx, especially of young men and young people in general, just flooding the churches and specifically the Orthodox Church because of this very reason, right? There's the knowledge, there's the information, and to some extent, COVID was a blessing in disguise. It was a catalyst, exactly. As terrible as it was, it kind of shook the whole status quo. And with this wealth of information through the internet, people are finding the safe harbor of the church.
Amen. You know, Adam, a lot of what you were saying, I resonate with so much. It kind of just anecdotally, I was one of those Calvinists. I was a, Reformed Presbyterian, Greg Bonson, Van Tillian Calvinist, and I went to college, studied philosophy at UCLA, and thought I knew it all, thought I had all the answers. I very much was that guy you talked about. I was the Calvinist, called myself a Christian, and yet I was not living like a Christian at all. And I actually came across a Roman Catholic. His name is Jeremy, also interestingly. He was a Thomist, and he was very intelligent man. And him and I just, began these conversations. And it was those conversations that led me ultimately to Orthodoxy, not to Roman Catholicism. But the reason I bring that up is that to piggyback off of what Nick said, I've been Orthodox for a while, but I very much allowed my own faith for a time to kind of wallow in mediocrity. And COVID, even for me, very much became this wake-up point, because I had spent years, Adam, and it sounds like similar with you, kind of that libertarian thing. I had spent years where I was always rah, we got to get this candidate elected. We have to defeat this proposition. That was my answer, and looking back on it, that was my religion. And COVID, I think, kind of finally opened my eyes to the reality that all of that is meaningless, and it's getting us nowhere. There's right, left, middle. I don't care where you're coming from. It's not the answer. Christ is the answer. And that's what I'm part of that wave Nick is talking about. Even though I was already Orthodox, it definitely brought me back to a true faith. And so I'm just kind of curious your further thoughts on that.
Well, it's interesting. I think if you well, there's a lot there. So if you if you back up your mainstream Protestant into a corner, you back your, I shouldn't say mainstream Roman Catholic, your genuine mainstream Roman Catholics are basically atheists, right? So you're someone who's actually knowledgeable about Roman Catholicism, maybe a Thomist or something, and you back them into a corner. They're probably going to agree with you that Christ is the truth. Like, they're going to say that or give nominal credence to that, but it's just it's almost indescribable how different the conceptualization of that is, because at the end of the day, at least from my point of view, the Roman Catholic Church is a socio-political institution, not a religious institution. And as a result of being a negation of Roman Catholicism, Protestantism is just a democratized version of a socio-political institution. So there's
interesting.
Essentially, libertarianism is just an outpouring of Puritanism mixed with Cavalierism that turns into deism, which turns into secular libertarian Locke, Berkeley, Hume type of thought.
Yeah.
So there's I think a lot of tendency for specifically the kind of the Protestant, Presbyterian, Calvinist, Reformed set to find a home in libertarianism. There's also a good place for an atheist to find a home in libertarianism, because there is no hierarchy in libertarianism. The Roman Catholic is going to be more tuned to the Roman Empire hierarchy state of socio-political affairs. It's going to be more FACIS, right? That's going to be more that. It's going to be more tiny mustache man than it's going to be the democratized papism of Protestantism. But I think that's when you're trying to find an ideal and you don't have an ideal, or you have an ideal-ish. Libertarianism seems like it works because it has all of these don't hurt people, take their stuff, you don't want to leave people alone. And you realize very quickly there is no moral imperative in libertarianism at all. So you realize that, taken to its logical conclusion, I don't know if you guys have ever read Chaos Theory by Robert Murphy. It was his doctoral dissertation. It's horrific. And it's essentially not horrifically written, it's well written, but what it lays out for the future of a libertarian society is horrific. And you read that, you're like, I don't want to live in this. It's chaos. Like, that's literally in the title, but he means it in a good way. And I think what COVID did, to your point, is it pulled the veil back. It lifted the curtain over what the libertarian type, right-wing kind of hero type considered to be a problem in peacetime. Right, we could have these libertarian conversations. Is Rothbard or Mises more libertarian? What about Hayek versus Hoppe? Right, which one's more? And then all of a sudden, peacetime is over, and you're at war, right, with 2020, and all of a sudden, all of that theoretical nonsense doesn't matter anymore. Right, you're seeing actual world. It's not war in the streets of people shooting each other, but kind of. Right? It's political war,
absolutely,
socio-political war,
and spiritual
absolutely.
war. That's really what really pushed me into having more religious conversation toward the segue out of the libertarian show into the Orthodox show. Was I was really seeing, even as an atheist, something that just seemed to me like spiritual fever, like this egregore style spiritual fever overtaking half the country, for all intents and purposes. And it was mind-boggling to me. Like, you're not prepared for that in libertarian sphere, right? That's not a thing. And it just so happened that I was blessed enough to be in a circle of people that were heading in that direction also. It's Providence now, but at the time I would have said I was lucky, right? And but yeah, so when I remember I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, Jacob, who runs a Calvinist-ish libertarian podcast, and we were talking for like an hour about, I was saying how libertarianism and Christianity were not compatible, and he was making the affirmative that they are compatible. And this is late 2021, in August, September 2021, and I realized about an hour in that we were having two completely different conversations, that we were not talking about the same thing when we said the word Christianity.
Wow.
And that was the real wake-up call for me. Like, I thought he was talking like he thinks I'm talking like he's talking, and we're not using the same word the same way.
Right.
And that was the first time that I went, okay, maybe I need to give this a shot and see what's really going on here. And then you realize very quickly, it's not the same religion. It's not even close to the same thing. And that's where you run into, because nobody has heard of Orthodox Christianity.
Right.
No one. So
in the West,
in the West, right? So right. That's Facebook or Twitter, like anywhere that you were just talking to a random group of people you've known for 10 years online.
Yeah.
You're talking about Christianity. They're going to hear Boston PEDO scandal in the Roman Catholic Church. They're going to hear a creepy guy on TV who wants you to send $1 million in a Ferrari to
Joel Osteen,
prosperity gospel. They hear that, and you're like, yeah, I agree with you. That's not good. But here's this
Mhm.
other thing that actually predates all of that. And that those things are a corruption of this thing. And people are like, what? What are you talking about?
Right.
Mhm.
And then you start talking about, like I use Bonson and Van Tillian pre-sup arguments for orthodoxy. I mean, it's a good argument. It's just not a good argument for their point of view.
Exactly, which is so wild to me. Yeah.
But you use that again. And I was using those as an atheist. My father taught me, not Bonson, he didn't know who that was, but he was teaching me pre-sup transcendental arguments from the Kantian perspective when I was a teenager. So we were using transcendental arguments as atheists against Western Christians.
That's amazing.
And then I find myself using Calvinist pre-sup against atheists now, right. So it's just a really good argument. And it takes a lot of the onus off of someone who's not clergy, to not have to argue theology, because really I don't have to. I can just look at your worldview, not yours, but someone's worldview, and say, well, here's where you're getting it wrong up here. We don't even need the religion stuff. Just up here, you're totally missing the point. And that, I hope that helps kind of pull people out of where I was, or where you were, or where whomever was. Because if you're still in that place, and you've been exposed to all of this for the last 4 years, and you're still in that place, the 2019 place, you're scary, man. I don't know. I don't know if I want to be around somebody who's exposed to this and chooses to stay there. That's insane.
I've got to follow up, but I want to let Nick go. Nick, no, please do.
Yeah.
And I want to jump in.
Well, this is kind of in lieu of everything that you've been saying. I saw that in the description of your podcast, you posed the question, are you ready to embrace, this new age? And it sounds like this is kind of what you're talking about. I was wondering, what are you talking about when you ask that question to your visitors?
To be fair with you, I probably should update the whatever that says. But I think, it honestly, what's difficult here is we're trying to walk on my show, we're trying to walk a couple of different paths. We're trying to get people to, number one, understand that Orthodox Christianity is a viable option for them in their life. Like, I understand it's the truth, capital T, right? But from their point of view, it's a viable option in their life. And then we're trying to get them to understand that it isn't like a cornucopia or a Thanksgiving spread, a smorgasbord of options of which you pick Orthodox Christianity out, that it is a completely different paradigm, and separate from that paradigm are basically every other option kind of ends up in the same place. And that is like, if you're not ready to understand that your entire worldview, your entire paradigm could be completely wrong, incorrect, misleading, if you're not willing to accept that, you're not going to understand what we're talking about. It's not going to get anywhere. So the first step, I think, for us, this is what I think I meant by that at the time, was, are you willing to have your entire way of thinking questioned? And if you are, the next step is, are you able to, or willing to, but really able to defend it? If I question your point of view, okay, fine, question my atheism. I'm a hardcore atheist. I can stand up to you. And I question your atheism. Can you actually defend atheism based on the questions I'm asking you? And I'll just, spoiler alert, you can't, right? It's not. So you can think you can, but there is no philosophically justifiable position for atheism. Now, you could still be an atheist and just not care about any of that, right? You can say, oh, I don't care about philosophical justification. That's actually the only way you can be an atheist. So that's fine. But now that we've done that in front of people, we've demonstrated how ridiculous the point of view is. If you want to live in make-believe land, then go live in make-believe land. But we don't want to do this in a vacuum. We want to have this discussion in front of an audience. So people on the show, it could just be on Facebook, or it could be someone else's show, but we want to demonstrate it to other people, because the point of a debate is not to convince the person you're debating. It's to convince the audience. Right. So if we can demonstrate to the people watching or the people reading that the person is just playing child games and we're dealing with reality, then that massive group of people is going to be more tuned to accept the challenge of critiquing their worldview, right? So we're kind of growing exponentially off of that base. I think that's what I meant.
That's awesome,
nice.
Adam.
I hope or let me just say that is what I meant.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. It makes me wonder, have you seen any success or any like any viewers or subscribers say, hey, thanks, or anyone reach out to you?
Yeah, we get yeah, I would say probably 100% of direct contact that I get, which is more than you'd think. Most people who are really genuinely curious about Orthodox Christianity, genuinely curious about philosophy, will private message me on Facebook or email me or something, and that's how they want to talk. They won't, or I'll see them in person because I have a pretty large network of people in the restaurant industry, and they'll say, I never comment on your post, but I always see them. I wanted to ask you about this. So we get a lot of that.
That's really cool. What a blessing.
It is. It really is. And I'm very thankful for that. I would say as far as like YouTube comments and things like that, where 90% people are super into it and 10% incomprehensible gibberish. Like just the like, incomplete sentences. Maybe they don't speak English or something like I don't know what they're saying. So 90% effective, 10% maybe they are fat. I don't know what they are.
And they probably don't understand what you're saying either.
Yeah.
That 10%.
No, in the beginning, I used to say, I'm not sure what you're talking about. Can you elaborate? And then I realized that they're probably taking that as a jab at them. So now I just like it and heart it and don't say it.
That's funny. I do the same thing, Adam. I like and almost favorite every comment, right? Whether you agree with us or not. I'm glad you're there commenting, because like you said, it's for the audience. That you brought up Christianity as a viable option. My heart and mind always goes back to Protestantism because I came out of Protestantism. Many of my family and friends are still Protestants to this day. Some of them Calvinists. I have this theory that if Greg Bonson had lived longer, I think he would have become Orthodox. You've seen, a number have come out of that. If I were to ask at any given agape at the parish Nick and I attend, how many of you guys came out of Protestantism? Generally, it's somewhere 60-70% of our converts have come out of some form of Protestantism. A lot of it pretty conservative Calvinism. Have you seen that? What do you think about that? I mean, because I know you said it's interesting to use the transcendental argument tag, as an Orthodox Christian. I often hearken to Orthodox are basically all millennialists, which I know appeals to a lot of the, conservative Protestant mindset. What are your thoughts? Because I know you obviously have a heart for Roman Catholics, but you're very informed about Protestant as well. What have you guys seen in your local area in relation to that?
So, my experience with that is almost entirely electronic. The area I live in southern New England, there are parishes here, Orthodox parishes here that were founded by Roman Catholic clergy that came through Alaska. Right, we're like the first.
Interesting.
Here. 1895, 1893, 1897, like initial Orthodox churches here. So there's a lot of them.
Just to be clear, Adam, you said Roman Catholic, but you want to make sure you said Roman Catholic priests that came from.
Oh, I'm sorry, Orthodox. I'm sorry.
Orthodox. Yeah, I just want to be clear for the audience. Yeah.
Also, very old Roman Catholic churches. Yes, the very first Orthodox churches put up in the United States were right here, like we're in driving distance from where I live. And so there are a lot of them. And that's a blessing. Whereas a lot of places, I have a lot of friends who live in Texas and Florida, they might drive 2 hours to liturgy on Sunday. And that's the only Orthodox church they could get to. Right. So, but the difference being, at least in my experience with these folks, when they go to that parish on Sunday for liturgy, 60% of the people there are converts of the last 3 to 5 years. Whereas of all the places I've gone, I am the only non-cradle Orthodox person in the building.
So interesting.
There is no conversion thing happening in Southern Connecticut. At least I've tried very, very hard to find another person that fits my profile here.
Yeah.
And so far I've found 0 of them.
Well,
so the reason I bring that up, I don't have the conversion thing in person to go off of, but I do know that I don't think there's anybody other than the Van Tillians and then through him Bonson doing that type of argumentation outside of that sphere, right? I don't think there is. I haven't found anybody if there is. And certainly not in the normie Roman Catholic sphere. They may know like a philosopher outside of Plato and Aristotle, maybe, but their electronic medium, their shows like the Taylor Marshalls of the world and Scott Hahn's, they talk to their audiences like they're 5 years old. Like they don't have any real like higher ability in their brain. The Protestant, especially the Calvinist Reformed, they're heavy, deep theological thinkers. Like Calvin's Institutes is like, right? Like it's obnoxiously dense with information. So I think there's something about, this is a little speculative, there's something about the richness of Orthodox theology that is attractive to somebody whose brain works systematically that way.
Yeah.
And because there have been so many clergy converts, just Father Josiah Trent and Father Stephen DeYoung, people who published books, those books are specifically, and the podcasts, Lord of Spirits is a good example, is specifically tuned to the way Protestant thinks about the world.
Right.
It's tuned to their brain. So and you can't really do it any other way, because how are you going to, can't tune it to an atheist brain because that is gibberish, and you can't tune it to a Roman Catholic brain because honestly they would be bored and they wouldn't probably put out shows. So that's really the only audience you can go for.
That's really interesting. Yeah.
I think that would be my initial thoughts on that.
I was just going to say, be comforted to know that there's actually many people that are converting. We already mentioned this, but it's interesting because I think maybe it's in the West, on the West Coast, we're just newer. You know what I mean? That there's a lot of people that are just less rooted in whatever culture or, society, that they're almost, it's a blessing in disguise again, being, philosophically and religiously and spiritually just drifting, children of the hippies, and all of this counterculture stuff, like basically sprouted up, here in San Francisco. And in some way, it's like we're all making just a full circle and realizing, coming back home is the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, everybody has a different experience, and I think I'm in the situation I'm in here for reasons that are above my pay grade, and I think it's cool. I think it's when I meet clergy and church council members here, they look at me like I'm a unicorn, and I think that's just neat, right? It's a neat situation to be in. And for example, the Romanian Orthodox church that I go to, it's filled with Romanians.
That's so interesting.
That doesn't really happen in outside of here. So I get to learn about that culture. And if I want to go, up the road to the Albanian or down the road to Rokor is filled with Russian people. They speak Russian. Like a lot of them don't even know English. So it's like you can learn about the culture and the Orthodox Church at the same time. So it's just a different, like you said, it's a different way of getting to the same point. That if this is a situation, I'm not going to run from it, right? Like it would probably be easier to fly down to Texas, move down there, because I know like 12 people who go to the same church in Texas. That would probably be easier. But I think this is such a unique opportunity to, maybe I'll learn Romanian next year, right? Maybe I'll learn more about the culture. Like I've already started to learn how to say the Lord's Prayer in Romanian, which is kind of
fascinating. Adam, is the liturgy in English in your parish, in the Romanian parish? It's in English?
So it's all in English, and then certain parts are duplicated in Romanian.
Yeah, that's really that's amazing. You're seeing, because it's a common issue within Orthodoxy, and I feel like it's timing out, Lord willing, over time. But as what you're alluding to, but it sounds like you're not experiencing it in your parish, is that the ethnic element to it is one reason why nobody knows about Orthodoxy, right? The Romanians, the Bulgarians, the Serbians, they all brought their Orthodoxy with them to America, but they stayed in their little corner parish and they didn't talk to anyone else. Like you said, those Russian communities, they're still speaking Russian, right? They're not, most likely, I'm not speaking for them, of course, but they're not maybe affecting their community as much in the outside non-Russian speaking world in that area. Are you seeing that even in the Romanian parish, is the faith genuine? Are these people or is it a cultural thing? Because we've seen that I've seen it in certain parishes that I've attended over the years, where it's almost like it's a culture club. Hey, we're all doing the same thing. Isn't this great? Because we're all Greeks, or we're all this or that. What's been your experience in light of that?
Yeah, I would say it's a little of both.
Okay.
It's definitely not, having grown up in post Vatican II Novus Ordo in the Roman Catholic Church. I would, in my experience, my anecdotal experience in that world, almost everybody's mailing it in, but you have a full mass. This is in the 90s, 80s and 90s. Now there's nobody goes to that church anymore that I grew up, like 7 people. But it was never ethnic. It was a neighborhood. Grew up in that neighborhood. All the people from that neighborhood went to that church, right? And now they go to a different one or something. But yes, it's very ethnic based. And I noticed no matter which, because I did the church shopping in the beginning, right? I noticed that no matter which Orthodox parish I went to, there's always the people who come in right before communion and leave after communion, right? Especially if they have little kids, that tends to be the vibe. There's always going to be the percentage of people who come early for matins, that go to vespers on Saturday, that show up at the daily if there's a day, if you're lucky enough to have a daily, that those people are always there, and they're a much smaller percentage of the people who show up on Sunday. There are folks that I've seen over the last 2 years once or twice on Sunday that follow along in the lectionary that don't know what's going on. And there are obviously people who have things memorized. So yeah, it's not, if anyone's idealizing it in their head, it's not, it's very realistic, right? Some people care, some people don't care, some people go through the motions, some people don't go through the motions. It is definitely cultural. The most cultural up here are the Greek churches. The Greek Orthodox churches here are, I don't go specifically because I'm not Greek and it would be weird, right? It's not my choice to make it weird, right? So if that makes sense to you in the audience, I tried it a couple of times. The only question I would get from anybody is, "Are you Greek? Are you Greek? Are you Greek?" And
it's unfortunate.
So fine, like I have other things I could be doing than this.
Well, who knows? Maybe God is preparing you to be instrumental in bringing Orthodoxy to people of America. Who knows what could happen.
I mean, and it's not like to be fair to those folks at the Greek Orthodox churches, they know what they're doing there, right? It's not like they don't know that it's all about just spanakopita or something. But it can be insulating, right? And a bit maybe ostracizing if you're somebody coming in from the outside. So I think that I don't think that's the reason there aren't converts. I just think it's a lack of awareness, because I live, even though I moved around the country a bunch in the middle, I live where I grew up. So I spent 18 years very close to where I live now, and then the last 10 years or so back here. And I worked for Greek people. We opened up 2 diners together for a Greek family that went to a Greek Orthodox church, that I went to their festival multiple times at the Greek Orthodox church, and still had no idea what Orthodox Christianity was. So you can imagine if it's just a regular human walking around, how oblivious they are to this. I mean, I just assumed it was like Greeky Roman Catholicism or something. Like I didn't know. And I was more tuned in than most people. So I just think there's a lack of awareness. And if we could just get people to to have the information in front of them, even if it's just the academic information in front of them, if that's what it takes for the Western brain to jumpstart electronically to get into the mode, I think that's what got me there. And I know ultimately at the end of the day, it's prayer, fast, you know what I mean? Go to the
then they can come experience it. Then they can come see the truth. I think absolutely.
The initial push, just understand the Western brain and don't fight it. Like, just that's what they need, is that type of jumpstart informationally, and then you move over to that. So that's kind of been the way that I approach it.
It's definitely like the the union of the person, right? It's not just body, it's not just soul, it's soul and body. It's the faith, it's the theology, it's the practice, it's the belief, it's all that coming together. And I'm glad that you're, in one sense, you're a pioneer in where you are. In some ways, like Father Seraphim Rose, the way that he was in a Row Court church with Saint John Maximovich, but it was very much extremely foreign, to his Californian mind, but he was able to bring that to the people around him, and look at what he's done. So
I think we could probably agree that I won't have anywhere near the amount of success that he had in the world. I'm very uncomfortable with that comparison, but it's I think, but your overall point, I think, is correct in that it can be easy for folks who just get super orthodoxy real quick to be so against the Western mindset that they scorn it and never have the ability to connect with it, forgetting that they probably were that way like 2 weeks before, right?
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
like know
So
where you
true.
came from, understood how you got there, and just you're in the West, so
That's a fact.
that's what you're dealing with. Just deal with it and be nice and kind to people. And if somebody, and this is probably the greatest piece of advice that anyone could ever give anybody else, if it's not working with somebody, stop and go somewhere else, right? You can't beat it into somebody's brain.
Nope.
Like brainwash them into orthodoxy. That is, you're probably spiritually killing them doing that. So just stop if it's not working and move on to somebody else. Block them on Facebook if you have to, or move them to other place, right?
And it's probably pride on our end if that push continues when it's not working. You know, Adam, you had the beautiful pleasure of having Dr. Jeannie Constantinou on your podcast as a guest. She is a wonderful speaker, theologian, scholar, and Nick and I have had the pleasure of interacting with Dr. Jeannie. We recently went to a seminar put on through St. Andrew's, Father Josiah Trenham's church, Pacific Nectar Productions, and she talked about that, and she talked about the Western mind, and to your point, she, in essence, was telling us, she was admonishing us. Nick, I'm not sure if you remember this part, but she basically said, you guys are thinking like Westerners. She was talking to a group of Orthodox Christians, and it's so true, because I catch myself in it all the time, where I'm still applying the old categories. And so I think it's true for a lot of, certainly, converts, American Orthodox Christians. Even when we don't think it, we think we have the phronema, we're taking on the phronema of the church by God's grace. It's a hard nut to crack, over time, when you've been brought up in the Western mindset.
Yeah, I mean, and you just have to be patient with it, and you guys know, because you do this, this is mostly for the audience. You learn over time what works and what doesn't work, what you're good at and what you're not good at, what you're capable of doing long term and what you're not, what you have the energy for and what you don't.
Right.
I'm very thankful to Dr. Jeannie for coming on, because I didn't know this at the time, but that episode is really what pushed our YouTube page from 25 viewers to a few thousand viewers in a couple of weeks. And more so than anyone else who's been on. It was insane. And I just had her on because I read her books, and she answered the email.
See, that's awesome. Adam, I mentioned to you before we started recording that I had come across your website, and I didn't even know it, a while back. And it was that episode. I had watched your interview of Dr. Jeannie, not knowing you and really not knowing your website yet, or your podcast yet. So anyways, that was kind of I was one of those people who first came across your podcast through that interview.
And that's super cool, man. And that's what I think, like I said, I've learned that I hate to say I'm good at something, but what I'm better at doing than other things is reading and retaining information and content that other people put out. And so if I'm going to have somebody on like Dr. Jeannie, or even if it's a secular, well, he's Roman Catholic, I guess, but David Wemhoff, who did the Vatican II book, 1,100 page tome on Vatican II, and talk to him for 2 hours and have him say, like, did you memorize my book, Adam? Like, this has been the best conversation we've ever had. It's put the time into that, because people are going to appreciate that you did the work to have the conversation, that you're not just asking random questions and wasting somebody's time. I think that engagement is something I tend to do well, and I elevate when I talk to other people. If it's just me talking to the screen, I'm probably not as engaging, but talking to you guys, or talking to an author, or talking to somebody like that, it really makes me feel like I'm part of something, and I step my game up, right? It's like
that's
awesome.
That's
football.
awesome, Adam.
So that's what I do well. For other people, it might be something completely different. So it's, what you do well, do that. And rather than try to do 100 things adequately, do 1 or 2 things really, really well. And that will help push people. If you're lucky enough or blessed enough to help push people forward, I think that'll be more productive than trying to do a million things at once.
Yeah.
Nice.
I've got another question, Nick, but I don't want to cut you off or anything.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah.
So I want to recommend to our audience, definitely go check out that interview that Adam does with Dr. Jeannie. It's great, discussing kind of eschatology, revelation, the nature of the book, the history of its canonization, and of course the theology therein. It's really great. But beyond that, you mentioned that Rokor church where they're all speaking Russian, and it reminded me you've also recently another episode, which I think you're turning into a series, which I think is phenomenal. You had John Strickland join you. Super amazing. He and I'll let you talk about it more, of course, but you bring up the subject of nationalism, and the problem of nationalism in relation to Russia. And I feel, and I know it's one reason you're talking about it. We have that same exact issue in this country, in the United States. And to me, it's such an important juncture of where Orthodoxy is coming across, its roots. I had a conversation the other day with someone who was advocating for monarchy, in America, and it's fascinating. I won't give my thoughts as to what I think about it, but I guess I'd love to hear you, Adam, and even pitch those episodes, because it's great content, and maybe talk to us and our audience a little bit about where you guys are going with that discussion.
Yeah. So the John Strickland conversations came out of so essentially, so it was late 2021, and I mentioned I took 2022 off of doing shows and was just doing a lot of reading and focusing and catechesis and such. And one of the series I picked up, amongst other things, was it's actually right here, the John Strickland Paradise and Utopia series. And what I wanted to do was get in, because this is what we talk about in the age of information, right? Is there's no excuse. I wanted to find an accessible series of books that talked about early Christianity and how in the West it quote unquote went off the rails. There's the Yaroslav Pelikan series. There's several things up here that I could do that with that are headier than the way that Father John approaches his series. He approaches it from a societal Christendom point of view rather than a theological point of view. And he demonstrates how the negative and optimistic anthropology of the East and West diverge at certain times, and Roman Catholicism goes off here and Orthodoxy goes off here, and traces the lineage of that all the way through the Reformation, all the way through today in the series. I thought that would be a cool series. I think we've now done 11 and a half hours, and it'll probably be 13 hours through the first book. I think I pegged it. It's going to be about 80 hours when we finish all 4 books.
That's great.
Reading and discussing that series. So my friend Matt Erickson's, who does the King Pilled podcast, his father goes to Father John's church. So Father John found out we were doing that series, realized I had emailed him like a year earlier, got back to me and said he wanted to would I have a conversation? I'm like, yeah,
that's cool.
A year ago. And I would absolutely love to have a conversation, but I actually don't want to have it about this series. I want to have it about your Making of Holy Russia book. That was his doctoral dissertation that he turned into a book. And so he came on to talk about that. That's the episode you're referring to.
Right.
And he is obviously not political. So if you listen to him on, because one of the things people should do if they're interviewing, not me, but somebody, who's written books and is relatively known and sort of try to access as much information about that human as you can. Every interview they've done, maybe if you could find it ever, learn their personality, know what they're going to do and not do. If you know him going into the conversation, he's not going to tell you what he thinks the outcome of a political election is going to do to a country, right? So it was, how do we kind of draw a parallel between middle to late pre-Bolshevik Revolution Russia at the end of the empire, kind of the Nicholas II era, draw a parallel between that and America now. And specifically what I wanted to focus on was the Andrew Torba, Andrew Isker, Gab style Christian nationalism. Father John did not want to go there, so we kept it very general, but that was what was going through my head, because I subscribe to the Gab newsletter. I've been following them for a few years now. Not because I'm a fan or whatever. I think it's important to keep up with that view.
Adam, can you say more about that? I'm not super familiar with that element. Would you mind, for my sake and the audience sake?
Yeah. So just to sum it up real quick. So Gab, G-A-B, was a social network platform, or is a social network platform that was in the vein of the opposition to Twitter that was going on during the COVID time. And
interesting.
it was the one. There's locals. There's a whole bunch of other ones, right? But Gab was the one that was wiped off the face of the earth. Like all the card processors pulled out, all the internet companies pulled out, all the hosts pulled out, iOS pulled out, Google pulled out. Like they went from being a competitor in the sphere of free speech, right, to they didn't exist at all. So they had to build up all of their infrastructure from scratch, which they did. And now they are the Protestant Christian nationalist social media platform, credit card processing site, right? That's what they do. It's run by Andrew Torba, Torba, and his kind of group of people. And from an Orthodox point of view, it's very interesting because, you know, there's many different flavors of Protestantism. This particular group, they're very anti the tribe, the group who shall not be named. But they're also like very pro Puritanism. So it's an interesting, they're not dispensationalists, right? At all.
Yeah.
But there's also like other, which is, that's cool to get down. That good. You're not buying into that narrative, but also like there's some other destructive narratives of like, Thanksgiving is the epitome of American Christian holidays or something. Like weird paths go down in that don't really make any sense. So there's Christian nationalism there of like, we need the new guy on the right to step in and lead a Christian country. You know, I don't think they would use the word monarchy, but that's kind of want like a dictator type of person, you know, like a red hat guy to do something like that. And it ends up being this sort of bastardized version of Byzantine Symphonia that they're looking for. But I don't think Andrew Torba would know what I was talking about if I brought that up. You know, he doesn't, not aware of that. And if people want to see how low level this is, they can, there's a podcast he just put out. It started like 2 weeks ago. It's like 5 episodes.
Really?
And he talks for about 30 minutes on it, just him. It's really like low level stuff. You'll get an idea of it. But
I'm curious already, and I'm kind of surprised I missed all this, but it sounds fascinating. I want to look into it tonight. I can see what I'll be looking at online tonight.
He did set up the system though, so they do have a fully functional, self-contained internet system, which is
including payments, right? Including payment processing. That's phenomenal.
They do bank transfers. So essentially,
just B2B.
It's essentially Gab Pay. It's like PayPal.
That's Adam, I want you to know it's kind of ironic. I actually work at a law firm and we specialize in payments. That's what we do. We do payments, electronic payments law. So that's kind of of interest to me personally. But I do want to look more to that. That is fascinating because are you familiar with Theonomy? Do you remember learning about Theonomy? This was like a niche of a niche of a niche. And this is Greg Bonson. And a lot of his that school of thought, Rushdoony. Remember the name Rushdoony?
Yeah, JD Rushdoony or D.
Yeah. These theonomists.
So what was Theonomy again?
So Theonomy, the reason I'm bringing it up because it sounds exactly like what you're describing, and it was
Christian government. Yeah.
Yes, Theonomy is basically that the Old Testament, including the Old Testament law, should be applied directly to how you run a government. And it included even Nick, if you heard about this stuff, man. So I would flee I'd move to Australia if they ever took over. But I sad to say, I got to admit, there was probably about a year-long period where I was studying it, where I thought I was a theonomist. Because, to your, certain mindset, it makes sense, right? When you're in those boxes, it fits nice and neat into one of those boxes. But in essence, for the audience, theonomy is that any power structure, any governmental structure should be ruled by the law of God. And that includes things like not wearing two types of fabric. Obviously they were strong Sabbatarians, no work on Sunday, to the point where they had to deal, Adam, if you remember any of this, the incorrigible youth. You had to, in the Old Testament, if you read the law, an incorrigible youth was to be stoned to death. And theonomists actually talked about this stuff. About, here's how we'd handle it. And when I look back on it now, I was just like Looney Tunes. But at the time, I was like, oh yeah, you can make some some arguments for this stuff.
Yeah,
Love to get your thoughts, Adam.
It's essentially what the Puritans did, right?
Yeah.
They're taking
Yeah.
it without
really
without the context of realizing that the Puritans did it, right? Almost that it had never happened. We're just going to come up with it now as if it's a new idea. And a lot of that was that it's Puritan brain, right? And
right.
It's also like, I mean, antithetical to Christianity at all, right? It doesn't make
100%
sense to it. Yeah, I think I was getting it mixed up with Theosophy, which is the weird, creepy Aleister Crowley stuff. But yeah, Theonomy, right? So I don't know. It's hard. So I'm not getting from Gab they're not overtly saying that if that's what they want to do.
Yeah,
that might be under the surface there, but I think it's my take on Andrew Torba, and I'd love to talk to him if anybody has a contact. I'd love to talk to him. My take on him is that he wanted to run a social media company. It wasn't working. It seemed like the Christian nationalist thing was the way to get it working. So he went that direction and became a Christian nationalist. Like, he doesn't seem to have a deep philosophical understanding of what he's talking about. It's very superficial, surface level stuff. But other folks who come on there from the Protestant sphere do know what they're talking about. So I try to figure out them. And there, he did write a book, The Case for Christian Nationalism. Andrew Isker was the other guy. I have it, but I haven't read it. I don't really want to read it. I kind of want it downloaded in my brain so I don't have to read it, kind of thing. But there is that concept there to some extent. How far they would take it to, maybe not to stoning a kid and not understanding that like repentance could prevent that. That seems to, like, did you not read the verse right before it? Protestant, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
It's so like glossed over as a concept, and it's strange because these people are ultimately very deep, intelligent human beings in a wide variety of disciplines, and how they can be so haphazard with scripture in particular areas is concerning, right? When they're capable of being good at something, why are they so bad at that part? I don't know.
Adam too, there many of them, at least to their own minds, they're devout, right? They're practicing the Christianity that they know. And Nick, and we've talked about this as well. It's like, you can't, those they're not Orthodox, as you mentioned early in this podcast episode, Adam, they probably don't even know what Orthodoxy is. They just think it's Catholicism, but Greek, and so how can we blame them in some sense for getting things so wrong? But yes, it is. It's fascinating how these intelligent, learned, people are able to, in some of these areas, just go completely off the rails.
It seems to just be a willing choice to be insular. And maybe when you get in a certain level of academia, it doesn't matter whether you're a Christian or an atheist or whatever, you just get insulated. And one of the reasons I'm thinking about this currently is, have you guys read the book Albion Seed?
No,
so
I have not.
Essentially, it's I can't remember the author's name. I apologize, but he's tracing the initial founders of the United States in 4 different folkways. So the Puritans, the Cavaliers, the Scots-Irish, and who are the 4th ones? I can't remember. Oh, the Quakers. The Quakers.
Oh, okay.
4 different strains coming from England, and how each part of America they colonized in the 1600s and 1700s. And through that process, it's a socioeconomic study. He's not a Christian or anything. So it's actually it's a really good book, and you can get it on Audible. But one of the things he talks about from an atheist point of view is talking about the different strains of Protestantism and how they kind of adapt and grow and change and where they come from and the roots. And you realize when you're listening to this from an Orthodox point of view that every one of these groups, like, follow it all the way up through today, they all think that they're coming up with something for the first time, right? That, oh, you know what we should do? We should enact Jewish law from the Torah and stone kids. Like, how has no one thought of this in the last 4,000 years? Like, we should do that, like, right now outside of Costco, right? Like, as if there weren't 1,800 groups of people in your same strain decades before you coming up with the same idea as if they had come up with it for the first time. And so for me, there's that kind of willful disconnect from reality that, we today, this group, we're the ones that have it figured out, and we're the ones that are going to make it real. We're going to realize it today. We're going to do what nobody else could do. That arrogance that comes with Protestantism, that it does not allow you to see the bigger picture, because seeing the bigger picture means that in the grand scheme of things, you are actually only important to Christ and not, and really nothing else, right? That you're not this beautiful, great thinker who's going to get a statue built to them and, you know, become an immortal in the minds of men, right? Which is what I think a lot of these guys think they're doing. They think they're the next St. Paul. And that's not, Orthodoxy does not have a place for that type of human, that type of ego. So, but Protestantism doesn't just have a place for that type of ego. It's like, you need it in order for there to be Protestantism. There needs to be a human,
a charismatic leader
charismatic leader in that, you know, the little democratized papist in the room that's creating the system. So there has to be that guy, and like a lot of people want to be that guy. So if they're not, then they'll go just be the guy over here in this corner, and they'll come up with the new thing for the first time. So I think that just, it breeds that. It makes them both very hard to have a conversation with, because they are well armed with the info. But if you can get through, they're going to be the ones who are like, oh shoot, wow, okay, now we can talk, because you made the argument that I can't beat that argument, right? Which is what happened to me. So I know it can happen to them.
Amen. Yep. Well, you know, to that point, Adam, I want to give you the last word here. You know, we at Cloud of Witnesses, you know, Journey with the Saints, our entire goal is to bring the lives of the saints to those very people you were just talking about, right? To that Protestant group, but of course, obviously to our Roman Catholic brothers and sisters as well, to bring, as Nick likes to say, to bring out off the page, right? So hopefully these stories, the stories of this great faith that these saints have lived, this treasure house that we have in Orthodoxy, to bring it to those people, because we do believe it's life-changing. It can be life-changing. And so we are very grateful that you gave us your time today, Adam, out of your busy schedule. It's been fascinating talking with you. I feel like we could probably talk for another 2 or 3 hours easily. And I do look forward to talking to you more in the future. But that being said, thanks for coming on, and maybe leave our audience with, you know, where can they find you? What would you like them to know as they're going to find your podcast?
Yeah, so the best place to go is YouTube. We're still on YouTube. I do a pretty good job of not getting strikes or getting kicked off of YouTube. It's at the age of _info, or you can just type in the age of information, Adam Patrick, into Google. It should come right up on YouTube. That will always be up to date. Now, whether or not that transfers to Rumble or Rockfin or Odyssey is up to 10% how much I check on the technology to see if it's working, and 90% whether the technology is working. So it may or may not update to other and then if you don't do that for like 4 episodes, it becomes 400 times harder to do it all.
Interesting.
YouTube's good. It does upload to, you know, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever, but same thing. I have to do that separately. Sometimes I forget. So YouTube is the best place to go. And if you're going to subscribe to anything, you really should just subscribe to YouTube, because there's as much as it's the devil, there's a lot of information on there. You might as well use the devil for something. So if the devil's only costing you $10 a month, you know, go do that. That would be where I would direct people there. And, you know, send me a note or whatever, Adam at theageofinformation.com, or on Facebook. You can find me, Adam, middle initial R, Patrick. On the rare occasions that I haven't deleted Facebook off my phone, you can message me on that. I love talking to people. A lot of the folks that I met I have on the show now are people that I met through the show, through Facebook, being on other people's shows. We talk on the phone all the time. I've never even met most of these people in person, but just random viewers have become friends of mine.
That's really
super
cool.
Happy to do that. So
it's awesome.
One of the things you should remember, though, is if you're going to message me on Facebook or something, just make sure I know you're a real person and not like a weird bot or something. If you have a avatar, just say, hey, I'm real. My name is human, because I will delete you and block you, because we don't, you know, I'm 41. We don't have time for all that. So but yeah, and I love what you guys are doing. I'm glad that we fell on each other's radar. I think you said a treasure house. I think that's true. The lives of the saints are the demonstration in reality of all of this theoretical stuff that we talk about.
100%.
There's no way I'm going to demonstrate
You nailed it.
highlight what they are demonstrating. And I
Mhm.
think that's what's so beautiful about what you're doing. I'd love to, have you guys on to get deeper into that in the future. I think that would be beneficial to my audience as well. So yeah, I appreciate you inviting me on.
Awesome.
Thanks for coming on. God bless your work.
God bless you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening to the very end. We hope that you enjoyed and were edified and maybe learned something for that
Amen.
conversation with Adam Patrick.
Amen. If you're interested to hear more of Adam's stuff, we'll leave the link in the description below. So just check it out.
Absolutely. And another huge thank you to Adam. We really appreciate your time. It was a lot of fun talking with you. And we're looking forward to working with you more in the future as well.
Indeed. Thank you so much, everyone.